Today on Off-Grid Cooking, I'm going to teach you how to make the best smoked salmon you've ever had. It's super simple. Stick around.
So our very first step is to prepare the salmon. But I do try to do my best to debone the entire salmon and cut it into serving size strips, something like, I don't know, inch and a half wide, and then kind of the length of the fillet itself. So once we've prepared our salmon, the first step in a great smoked salmon is the brine. I know some people out there use a liquid brine. Some people do a sugar and salt brine, which we also do. And a lot of the recipes will call for 50-50 on the salt sugar mix, which that's where we have the secret. The recommendation from all the years, and this is a recipe that's been passed down from my dad, and no joke, it's better than anything I've ever bought in a store. Everyone that tries it gives really great reviews, and I'm not kidding when I say it is the best smoked salmon you'll ever have. So between the brine and the cook time, that's where I think we do things slightly differently and keep it to be very flavorful and very moist. Our recipe calls for 2 cups brown sugar, 3/4 cups salt. So in here I have my mixture of sugar and salt. For overnight, I'm just going to use a little casserole dish or whatever this Pyrex container would be called. And essentially, what we're doing with the brine is kind of curing the salmon and adding a bunch of flavor, as well as drawing some of the moisture out. You will also notice that this is going to shrink. Probably about 1/3 of the mass will be gone, and this will all be liquid when we take it out tomorrow. So to start, we're going to do a very light layer on our bottom, and then a layer of our fish fillet strips. So I'm just going to lay these out in a way where they're even and trying to get one even lower layer. And once we have one entire layer, we're going to cover that entire layer almost like making a layered cake, because we want this brine to touch every surface of the fish that we possibly can. And I also like to lift it up to make sure it's getting on those edges and really make sure that we're covering it. This is only one salmon fillet, so I should be okay using a ton of this brine on this first layer, and then putting my smaller pieces and end pieces on top of that. So once we get our entire brine salmon mixture covered here, we are then going to cover with a plastic wrap and leave in the fridge overnight. I've seen some people call for 8 hours or less. Overnight, we might be 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. I've never noticed that makes a huge difference in the quality. I think there's some concern over getting overly salty, but if you do it at the end of the day, you put it in the fridge and you start your smoking the next morning, you should be in good shape. Or if you just time it out like I am today of just about an 8-hour brine, we'll be picking up the actual smoking in the afternoon. So keep this in the fridge, let it sit for 8 hours, and then we'll be on to the smoker.
When complete, it should look something like this. All right, it's been 8 hours. Our salmon is done with the brine. It should look something like this. Tons of fluid. If you guys recall, that was all just salt and sugar. It took a bunch of the fluid out of the salmon, as you can see, and the salmon has probably lost, a 1/3, maybe even some pieces as much as a half of their size and mass. So the crucial step next is to completely wash the salmon, get all of that salt, all of that brown sugar off, and then dry it really, really well. So I use paper towels for that. As far as drying goes, you want it to be dry to the touch, and then it'll go on the smoker. So I'm gonna go in and wash the salmon, get it completely dry. In the meantime, I have the smoker plugged in. We're getting the coil warmed up. And this time around, we're using Weber's apple chips. I like to put about just one layer in my pan. You can put a little more than that, but I find, it's only the stuff that's making contact that'll start smoking. I'll usually, mix this up once or twice during smoking. And for us, So we're gonna smoke our salmon for 2.5 hours, and during that time we'll go through 3 or 4 trays of wood chips where we completely toss out the burnt stuff and replenish. So let's get this salmon completely washed off and completely dry to the touch. Once you have your salmon washed and dried, I got this to the point where I can touch it with a paper towel and get no moisture. You can see how much smaller, hopefully my hand is a little bit of scale from the first time, how much smaller they are now because of all that moisture that's been extracted from the brine. The other thing I forgot to mention is we actually smoke or use our smoker with the box on. It creates just a little bit of insulation, and that insulation is enough to make a little bit of a difference. And before, when I said it's a 2.5 hour cook time, that is not set it and forget it. That's a really good mark for us up here in the Pacific Northwest on a good, 75-degree day with the box on. That's pretty much the amount of time it takes to get to the perfect consistency. And our smoked salmon, we take off before others. It keeps it moist, it's flavorful, it's much, much better than the people who dry it out to the point, we're not making jerky here. So the whole point of that is, once we set it in the smoker, we're gonna check it every half hour to hour. We're gonna make sure that it's constantly smoking. As you guys can see, I actually already have the wood chips in, it's plugged in. It's gonna take several minutes till it starts smoking. So I'm gonna load up the rack and then we'll get going on this round. And again, roughly 2.5 hours in these conditions here. But I've heard stories like a friend giving a friend instructions where the friend lives in Las Vegas, have the smoker in direct sun. It was probably a 100+ degree day. And that person told him to smoke it for like 4 hours, and by the time 4 hours passed, it was charcoal. So 2.5 hours in our conditions works really, really well, but it is something you want to monitor and keep an eye on. And like I said before, we'll be replacing our wood chips 3 to 4 times during that period. We want smoke continuously, and once we pull out that tray and the chips are all blackened, we'll replace them, and we can obviously kind of mix them up throughout. So now it's time to load up those racks. This is a top loader. Other consideration to make, obviously we have different sizes, we have different thicknesses. Sorry, the lighting's so bad. That piece is going to be a lot thicker than like the end that's closer to the tail. And the closer we are to the heat source, so my lower racks, the faster that's going to smoke. I like to fill from the top down with my smallest pieces at the top, the biggest ones below it, the absolute largest pieces closest to that heat source, because that's going to cook the fastest. So let's get this thing loaded up and then we'll be all ready to put it in. All right, the wood chips are starting to smoke, so we should get some heavy smoke pretty soon. We're gonna leave that. We'll check it in about an hour. We want to check on the wood chips, we want to check on the fish. We're expecting 2.5 hours. It could be done anywhere between 2 to 3, but almost always 2.5 works out really well, again, given our conditions here in the Pacific Northwest. Couple of things I may have forgotten to mention. This is a Little Chief smoker. That brand is really great, so if you're looking to get your own, I think this one you can get for around 150 bucks these days, maybe a little bit less. They have a bigger version as well. I believe the bigger version has doors. This one is that top down, as you guys saw. We have those racks, and it'll cook a little bit slower at the top, a little bit faster towards the bottom. And the other thing I wanted to mention, because this is obviously off-grid cooking, today is kind of a little bit of a cheat code because I'm at my house, but this is 100% intended to be used up at the cabin at the Derby Canyon Retreat. The solar energy system that I'm going to be installing this weekend should have enough power to be able to smoke the fish for the 2.5 hours or a little bit more necessary. Point of me getting this and being able to learn how to smoke fish and other meats is to take it up to the cabin and use that as a way to preserve meat without having the need for refrigeration. Especially when it comes to like jerky or curing meat. Smoking is a really great way to cure without cooking to last a long time. And my goal is to learn how to fly fish and go up, catch fish directly out of the river, be able to smoke it that night, Doesn't get much more fresh than that. And you talk about really knowing where your food comes from. That's truly living off the land and, you know, controlling my food source. And so this is a skill to help with the living off the land skill set that I'm developing, a way to preserve meat and be able to utilize this in the off-grid setting. The smoking process is just beginning. You can see we got a little smoke coming out there. We'll give it some time. We'll check back in about 45 minutes to an hour from now and make sure that our wood chips are good, make sure that we continue to have heavy smoke throughout, and roughly 2.5 hours, give or take, we should be ready to go with some incredibly delicious smoked salmon. Now when it comes time to check the smoked chips, half of it's burnt, half of it isn't. Basically I'm just gonna treat it like I'm sauteing them, try to get that fresh wood on bottom. There's not a whole lot left in here that's gonna make for great smoking. So maybe in about 10 or 15 minutes, I'm gonna replace this. But typically, you can get those completely burnt out before you replace it. If you're not familiar with these smokers, it just has a heating element in the bottom. So really all you're doing is heating that pan, which is then burning those chips, obviously creating smoke. And so every 15 to 30 minutes, you just want to come out here, kind of do the sauteing mix, if you will, and get some new wood exposed to that heat source. And like I keep mentioning, 3 to 4 of these pans of fresh wood chips throughout this entire process. All right, so smoke is dwindling a bit. This is actually my second container of chips. When it looks like that, you're far beyond replace. You know, this is one where I did a little mix up probably about 10 minutes ago. Now I'm gonna go throw this in my fire pit. Always be super, super careful where you dispose of these. Obviously you don't wanna put them in your trash can inside. They are very hot. They're basically coals of a fire. And so I'm going to empty them, fill it back up, and then we'll be good to go. All right, we're about 2 hours in. We have just about half hour or so left, and I wanted to show you guys what taking it out looks like. With these top loaders, you definitely need to be careful. If you have a spill, you could lose everything. But at this point, I just want to make sure we're not overdoing it, get a feel for where we're at, and get a gauge if half an hour seems like enough time. So we just open up our cardboard box and the lid. I like to use a pair of metal tongs right on that center support. And yeah, buddy. The brine shrinks it. It seems about a third, and smoking takes it the rest of the way. I would say we're very close. It can be hard to tell without breaking one open, so I usually do. And I would say half an hour more, and we'll be in real good shape. And what I'm checking for when I'm tasting it is basically like the moisture content. For us, we want our salmon to be firm and smoked with very little moisture. If we can feel moisture, or if it's super soft or kind of mushy, we know we need a little bit more time. We typically don't take it as far as like some other smoked salmon or a store-bought where it's getting closer to almost a jerky. All right, we are just over in 2.5 hours. Let's see how it's looking. Oh yeah, it smells so good. It forms almost a shell of smoke-cured exterior while still having a really moist interior. The flavor is super good. And again, we smoke ours less than what might be traditional where you might find elsewhere. But in my opinion, it makes a far superior product. So there you have it. The recipe for the world's greatest smoked salmon. Try it out yourself and let me know how it goes. My mission is self-reliance through sustainable living, and we're here to build a community. Click here to subscribe to be sure to get more awesome content for living off the land. And be sure to go in to enter for notifications. Click that bell, get notifications, and stay in tune. Subscribe, watch, and comment. Let's build a community. See you soon.